Salutations! Welcome to Loving the Language of Literacy. My name is Sophia Lee, and today you are in for one of the longest wrap-ups that will ever be on this channel. Before I get into the actual wrap-up for this month, I do want to establish something, and that is that starting in February, there will be no more wrap-ups on Loving the Language of Literacy. I know it's insanity, but let me just explain. I am not going to go on about autopiloting a booktube because we've all heard those discussions. I'm deciding this not as a response to the whole autopiloting discussion, not because I disagree or agree with it, but simply because I have figured out that these videos are getting way too long. 17 books to talk about. If I spend a minute on each book, you will be here for 17 minutes, plus intro, plus outro, which means like 18, 19 minutes of a wrap-up. And I know there are people who love long videos, but I also know that in the process of filming these, I have to cut out so much in editing because of the excess that I can't say in the wrap-up. So, because I still have a terrible memory, and that has not changed since last month, and I do mention this, I think, in every single wrap-up I've ever filmed, I am going to be filming a sort of mini review for every 3 to 5 books I read, and I'm very excited to see how this turns out. Especially because I am filming this wrap-up on the 9th of January and I've only read 2 books. Yeah. For the record, I have a number of books that I'm in the middle of, so that number will soon change, but 17 books versus the 2 books I've read so far on the 9th. Not very matchy-match. And I think we've also concluded that Februaries are not my best reading month of the year, probably one of the worst. Because we all know last year I got a boyfriend and a life. I don't know what's going to happen this year. I'm not going to get a boyfriend this year in February, that's for certain. I'm going to be alone on Valentine's Day again. But we'll figure it out. I'll probably get absorbed in writing again or learning French and Spanish and doing all the work I have for my American school while juggling my British school by day. It's kind of a double life thing going on. You get me. I'm like Hannah Montana. Today I will be talking to you about all the books I read in January of 2015. And as per usual, the very first month of the year was stellar for me, and I managed to read something along the lines of 17 books. In terms of statistics, this month was actually extremely interesting for me as a reader, mostly because out of all of those, it wasn't even like there was some novellas thrown in. There was only one graphic novel that I had to read for school, and besides that, everything was either a novel or some sort of nonfiction. The other thing that might want to be mentioned is that I think I listened to something crazy like 11 or 10 audiobooks this month. Don't ask me how I did that or found the time to. And I only read 6, 7 books, like physical ones or on my Kindle. I don't want to have this happen to me in February, but in terms of actually soaking in and absorbing and experiencing the story, I don't regret it. There's also the fact that out of the 17 books that I read this month, 7 of them were nonfiction, which for me is quite an accomplishment, and it really says a lot about my reading taste throughout just this year alone, which has only just begun, really. Instead of talking about these books chronologically like I've done in the past, to speed up this process, I've actually organized them by category. I've done this mostly because I figured out that when I have books in the same genre, I tend to say the same backstories about them and have to cut that out later. So now I'm going to have one long backstory and talk about all the books in a row, and it'll be fine and dandy. Hopefully. The first category I have in today's wrap-up is memoirs or just plain old nonfiction, and these are actually 3 books I listened to by audio. The first one being Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and that is how I'm guessing you pronounce the author's name. I honestly can say I have never listened to a book more unlike this one. This is completely out of my comfort zone. What's funny about it is I actually gained a lot of insight and just knowledge that I didn't have before about one of my parents' occupations. He's a professor of gerontology. I never really knew what it was about besides the fact that it was old people. That was literally my extensive knowledge about my parents' work. Atul Gawande is this surgeon, and throughout his practice, he has been observing people as they get old and what happens in their later years as they are dying and everything else that happens naturally when the body breaks down due to old age. This has not been going on for a long time whatsoever, but in the 21st century, late 20th century, as a society in general, we have been focusing so much on prolonging life and not prolonging the actual experience and what actually comes down to mattering to them in their last years and months and days. The next book I have here is a memoir, You're Never Weird on the Internet, parentheses, almost, by Felicia Day. For the record, this was the second book I read this year, and I had no flippin' clue who Felicia Day was. I still kind of really don't know who she is past anything that was in her memoir, and I'm kind of really just okay with that because I had such a fun time listening to it. It delivered exactly what you want out of all of these YouTubers and people of pop culture's memoirs, and that is a hysterical, entertaining recount of their lives and some of the behind-the-scenes knowledge of their careers and what they've done to get to where they are now. She is so quirky, and a lot of the things that she tells you about really is something you would expect from a work of fiction, but at the same time, it's one of those things where you know that it just has to be real by how weird it is, and I loved how honest and truthful it was. The other memoir I listened to this month was 1,000 Miles to Freedom, My Escape from North Korea, written by Yoon Sun Kim. That is so racist considering I'm actually Asian and I hate when people mispronounce my name. I, for one, am one of those teenagers that knows they are extremely ignorant and need to be educated more about things going on in the news, but frankly isn't. This has just been a first-hand account of the horrors of North Korea and everything still going on there. I know this is a real person and this real person has gone through a bunch of crap, but in terms of who I am as a reader and what I appreciate as well as look for, I know this is also translation and she missed out on 9 years of schooling, but at moments I didn't feel the language flowed well enough, and it did feel very authentic in terms of how she described her life and her journey in, I don't want to say simple terms, I'm not trying to insult her vocabulary and use of mechanics and grammar, but just the actual flow that I've come to expect from people recounting their lives was not there in the way that I classically want it to be. The next two books we have here are part of a series, the first one being a reread and the second one being one that I listened to through audiobook that I had never previously experienced, and that is Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. Orson Scott Card is one of those very special science fiction authors, one of the very first that I think ever read from. I know the first time I read Ender's Game was November of 2013. I know my memory might have holes, but I also think that it did a good job for trying to appeal to mainstream media consumption, which obviously may have lost some of the essence of the story, but it did as good of a job as it could. What I love about Orson Scott Card's writing is the intense way he gets inside characters' heads and completely destroys their psyche. I just love his different descriptions of the battles and the tactics and the techniques the characters used. The primary victory throughout every single book was just win, 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 be the best, be better than everyone else so you can survive. Speaker for the Dead was different on the other hand because it focused on Ender 3,000 years in the future, but only 15 years later in actual age, because light speed space travel allows for that. And we start off the story actually on a completely different planet that we had never heard of before, with a new cast of characters and new conflict. Ultimately what happens is Ender travels to this planet, and through helping the mysteries of what's going wrong, he also manages to fall in love with a woman as well as her children. And it was so great to see this destroyed human being find and heal himself with love. Orson Scott Card actually originally intended the Ender books and all of his books really in the whole world to be narrated, because that's the way he designed them to be experienced. He kind of wrote Ender's Game almost as an afterthought, and the real book he wanted to write was Speaker for the Dead. I enjoyed so much seeing the new civilization and the new way that in Ender's Game, the buggers were only this abstract concept that we weren't associated with whatsoever. But then with Speaker for the Dead, the piggies were actually these beings that we were with throughout the entire story and saw from their perspective and saw their progression, even if the characters were puzzled most of the times to their motives. If there is any book that I read that carries out the duty of me reading diversely in the year of 2016, this book would be it. And it is the Neoclassical Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, which is upwards of around 550 pages. Which, considering it's a neoclassic, it's quite a lot. If you don't know already, I am absolutely in love with the story of Little Women. I know the audiobook inside and out to a point where I can recite full monologues from it. I just thought I cannot call myself a full and legitimate fan until I physically read it. I can't even describe to you what I love so much about this book. I'm not particularly religious, and there are quite strong themes of having faith in God. It's such a heartwarming story of family and familial relationships between Beth, Amy, Joe, and Meg, and then Marmee and Mr. March. I was prepared beforehand from my friend Ella, who read it, who said that she could definitely tell that Louisa May Alcott was paid by the word count, because she did spend quite a long time with descriptions, but because those descriptions were one of the very rare things that the audiobook didn't include at length, I was actually very entertained and kind of even engaged by reading them, because to me it was kind of like behind the scenes content. My new favorite character, obviously, besides Jo and the core cast that we have in Little Women, is Professor Bear, because Jo is such an adamant, independent young woman, and that's why I love her so much as a character. But it was so great and refreshing to see her gradually fall for this man with just utter intellectual respect for each other. I read 2 Colleen Hoover books this month, the first being part 3 of the Never Never, I don't know what you want to call it, series, which is co-written by Colleen Hoover and Taryn Fisher. There have been 3 parts released over the past 1.5 years, and in each 100 or so digital page installment, we develop on the story of Charlie and Silas, who after 48 hours have apparently woken up at exactly 11 a.m. with no recollection whatsoever of their life and times before. This being the 3rd installment, everything had to wrap up. I personally felt it was a bit like the Retribution of Mara Dyer in that there was so much mystery surrounding their memory loss, but the actual answer and conclusion to everything didn't exactly make sense and didn't really feel fitting for the actual flow and momentum the story was carrying on throughout the first 2 installments. The other Colleen Hoover book I read was November 9, her latest release. I'm just going to use my analogy that Christine Riccio uses, which is there are 2 tiers of Colleen Hoover books: awesome and awesomer, and November 9 was just awesome. I don't know whether it was the fact that there was the distance of every single year the characters meeting on November 9, which messed things up, or my frustration with the whole gap. Obviously, our main protagonist had reasonings as to why she didn't want to dive into a relationship when she first met this guy, but there was also this tangible feeling connection between the two that it felt sort of unrealistic they could resist each other. Obviously, the entire premise is unrealistic as well, but I didn't feel the normal Colleen Hoover feels, and that's basically the #1 piece of criticism I can give to it, considering this is a novel by my favorite new adult author. Now I'm going to be talking about the 3 young adult novels that I read this month. The first being Consent by Nancy Olin. I went into it trying to get the story I expected, and I didn't even get that. Essentially, this is one of those stories about a student-teacher relationship and all of the, excuse my language, shit that goes down because of it. This book didn't follow through with it. The entire resolution of the story was completely, it wasn't even a resolution. I can't even say I was disappointed by it, because I personally felt the author completely dropped the ball on us as a reader and was like, well, this happened, the end, let's give us an epilogue about this character's future, yada yada yada. If you've read this, definitely tell me what you think and what reason you read it for, because I definitely don't think it's top-notch scandalous topics. This book is one where I'm betting you can probably guess everything I'm going to say about it, considering nearly every single person on BookTube talked about it last year or the beginning of this year, because it was such a huge release, and it is the end to a 4, technically 5 book series. And if you haven't guessed it already, this is Winter by Marissa Meyer, the last book in the Lunar Chronicles, which is a science fiction young adult retellings of all these classic fairy tales. I personally wasn't the biggest fan of Cinder and Scarlet. I started liking it a bit more with Cress. I thought Fairest was quite a nice addition to the whole arc of everything, but Winter completely blew me away. I sincerely think that I have never read any other young adult book where everything I wanted to have happen happened. I know for some people the issue was that no one of that great importance died, nothing huge happened at the very, very end, but you've got to remember and think about the fact that so much crap happened to these characters throughout the entire Lunar Chronicles, and that their lives will continue afterwards with the release of Marissa Meyer's new bind-up of novella Stars Above. And to get to the point of a happy ending, a lot had to happen. But I personally thought, in the whole vein of fairy tale retellings, the happy endings all the characters received were absolutely perfect and very much well deserved. The other YA book I read is the companion novel to My Life Next Door, one of my favorite contemporary young adult romances from 2015, and this was The Boy Most Likely To. I expected and sort of relied on it being more similar to My Life Next Door. Normally I love how seemingly fluffy contemporary romance novels bring in all these more serious aspects and social issues, but in this particular case, I thought the trope that Huntley Fitzpatrick used for a reformed bad guy was a little bit more actually on the new adult side, or at least not something we normally see in YA, and because I've seen it so often in new adult, it seems very much so overdone, and I didn't feel like Huntley Fitzpatrick brought anything specifically original to the table in this aspect of the story, but overall it was quite enjoyable. I just didn't get what I hoped I would out of it. Nevertheless, I do love the dynamic when one character has a sort of flirtatious, not very serious attraction to the other, and the other is just completely unruffled whatsoever by their moves, and they really kind of just hates them. The two of them break down each other's walls, and they are perfect together by the end. Now, this is gonna be simply hilarious for anyone who actually knows me in real life, but this month I listened to 4 different self-help books. I think you've kind of just like gone off the edge if you are starting to listen / read self-help. Like, I honestly respect people who do it, but I am legitimately a teenager, and I agree that I am crazy for actually enjoying some of these books. And I will say that after listening to 4 of them, that the overall generalization, they all sound the same, is kind of true when you think about the overarching messages and themes they portray. There's a lot of phrases that have just been made into these icons of inspirational thought, so I can't blame anyone too much on that. The first one was me trying to follow through with my New Year's resolutions, which were to use and to value my time as much as possible. And of course, one would assume that doing that is best accomplished by waking up early, which for me is one of the hardest things I can ever do. After that, because this audiobook was actually really short, I listened to I Know How She Does It. Her motto is to break down your time as a mosaic and to deal with the, I am not in the mood for math, but whatever 7 times 24 is, I think it might be 168 hours in the week, instead of looking at it as 24 hours in a day, and just what you can do and what you can move around all the tiles of your life to accomplish everything. On the whole thread of self-help and time management, I also listened to Essentialism by Greg McKeown. That's how I'm gonna say it's pronounced. And what I can basically sum up for you, the entire book, was that you need to learn how to say no to make room for all the other essentials in your life and be able to shoot down opportunities that may arise for the sake of accepting the better ones that you really want to do. Of course, I love knowing tips and tricks, but at the same time, with the 4 self-help books that I've listened to this month, I've learned what style works for me and what doesn't. Considering all these authors are essentially saying the same thing, it really comes down to the tone of how they're saying it and how they're delivering their message. I personally just didn't feel like this author accomplished that in the way that I personally want to be talked to. I would definitely not recommend it, because it is a very good book on how to practice essentialism and get rid of everything that you don't actually need. Speaking of things that you don't actually need in your life, the next and last self-help book of the month was The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. And this book, it's become kind of a fad. I've seen this literally everywhere. I think it more is just the shocking OCD-ness of the author, as well as just her seriousness and genuine approach to living her life. To me, as a not very tidy person, seems absolutely outrageous, and how cleaning up your home cleans out your whole life. I'm not exactly going to be putting this method to the test, but I do see the truth in her words, and if you are like my parent who wants me to not leave my clothes all over my bedroom floor, I would definitely recommend this book. The graphic novel I read this month, which fits into no other category, was the Christmas Carol adaptation of the book by Charles Dickens. What happened was, before I moved to English classes, they had just finished reading A Christmas Carol, and the teacher knew she was not getting my sister and I to read the entire thing, so she was just like, here, read the graphic novel in the hour of this period where we're going over our test that we took on it and just see what you make of it, which we did. I don't normally like graphic novels, and it was a graphic novel classic. I'm glad now that I know the story, even though I kind of already did. But it was fun experiencing the story in the different medium, I guess. Tell me in the comments below what you read this month. What was your favorite book? What was your least favorite? What book really surprised you? What do you really regret reading? I want to hear all about it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Keep calm, read on, and I'll see you in a video very soon. Goodbye.